Welcome back to the deep dive. It's so great to have you sitting right here at the table with us again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be back.
Today's mission is a big one. We are setting out to completely shatter everything you might assume about the rules of war, the foundations of peace, and, well, the hidden gears of human behavior itself.
It is quite an ambitious agenda for today, and we have an incredibly rich foundation to build this on. We're pulling from excerpts of the 2010 Oxford International Encyclopedia of Peace.
We really are. Specifically, we're zooming all the way in on this really complex intersection,
Right.
the relationship between gender and global conflict. Now, we know you're already well aware that gender is a sociocultural construct, not just a strict biological binary.
You don't need us to explain that.
Exactly. But what we want to shortcut you to being incredibly well informed on today is how that construct is actually weaponized.
What?
By using gender as a critical lens for analysis, we are going to uncover exactly how societies construct their battle lines.
And how they ultimately heal them.
Yes. Okay, let's unpack this.
Actually, real quick, before we jump into those mechanics, we need to establish a very clear ground rule for our discussion today.
Oh, right, of course.
Because the source material we are examining covers some incredibly difficult, politically charged topics. We're going to be looking at global conflicts, deeply ingrained cultural practices, and systemic violence.
Heavy stuff.
Very heavy. So, because of the nature of these subjects, it's vital to clarify right now that neither of us will be taking political sides or endorsing any specific viewpoints today.
Right, we're just looking at the text.
Exactly. Our sole purpose here is to impartially report and synthesize the factual, documented observations exactly as they're laid out in the historical research. We are looking at this purely through an academic and analytical framework.
Perfect. So let's start with the foundational theory the research uses to explain how these battle lines are actually drawn. The analysis relies heavily on the philosopher Michel Foucault and his ideas on power and knowledge structures.
Foucault is central to this.
And for those of us who haven't read Foucault recently, how does his specific framework apply to what makes a quote-unquote man or a woman in a given society?
What's fascinating here is how Foucault fundamentally reconceptualizes our understanding of power. We often think of power as top-down, like a king on a throne dictating laws.
Right, telling you what to do.
Exactly. But Foucault argued that power is actually a complex, invisible web of societal dictates and norms. And those norms regulate our very bodies and identities.
So society it decides what's normal.
Yes, society creates the knowledge of what constitutes proper masculine or feminine behavior, and then it uses various forms of power to enforce those rules. So to truly understand why conflicts happen and how they're sustained, we have to grasp these polyvalent or multi-layered aspects of human sexuality.
It's never just about biology.
Never. It's about who holds the power to define the norm.
And when you look at the specific historical examples the text provides, you see instances where those traditional male and female spaces just completely collide out of sheer necessity.
Right, the examples are incredible.
A standout one for me is the tradition of the Balkan sworn virgins.
Oh yeah, that is a perfect example.
In certain extremely patriarchal areas of rural Albania, property and family lineage can only be passed down through males. So if a family has no male heirs to carry on the name, they face absolute ruin.
Complete social and economic collapse.
Right. So to survive, a woman will take a strict allegiance of virginity.
And she doesn't merely adopt masculine traits, right? She literally takes on the social role of a man within that community.
Literally becomes the man of the house.
Exactly. She dresses as a man, speaks as a man, and is legally and socially recognized as the male head of the household to fulfill those filial obligations. The rigid patriarchal structure of the society paradoxically forces this intense gender fluidity.
That is wild.
The economic and social need for a male patriarch completely overwrites her biological sex.
And you see a similar defiance of the binary in other cultures too, though for completely different reasons. The research brings up Brazilian travestis. These are men who, starting from a very young age, transform their bodies with massive intakes of female hormones and liters of injected silicone to achieve a female appearance.
And the text also mentions other identities that challenge this.
Yeah, you see identities like drag queens, female bodybuilders, and what are referred to as muscle queens, which are gay male bodybuilders who heavily exaggerate masculine physical traits.
So the overarching takeaway I want you, the listener, to really consider here is how divisible human agency can be. Yes, norms are aggressively dictated by society, but human bodies and behaviors do not absolutely have to conform to those predominating beliefs.
People find a way.
They do. People can and do reconfigure their morphological characteristics and social roles through imagination, circumstance, and desire.
So if human beings possess that capacity for fluidity, why is the male-female binary so aggressively enforced, particularly in the West?
Well, the research points the finger directly at our institutions.
It frames places like schools and prisons not just as passive buildings, but essentially as gender factories.
Gender factories. That's exactly it. They are clear examples of enforcing a top-down structural ideal. Look at the history of education.
Okay.
For generations, U.S. military academies and British public boarding schools rigidly excluded women. These were entirely male spaces designed with a very specific institutional purpose.
To make men.
Yes. They utilized intense, ritualized initiations and forced loyalties to manufacture a specific type of man, one devoted unconditionally to the empire, the monarchy, or the state.
And the mechanism of control gets even darker when you look at federal Indian schools in the United States. Native American children were removed from their families. Systematically forced to abandon their own indigenous and often much more fluid cultural understandings of identity. The institution's entire goal was to force them to adapt to strict Western models of proper boys and girls through dress codes, haircuts, and punished behaviors.
And prisons operate on a similar frequency, reformulating gender roles to adapt to institutional survival.
How so?
Well, in male prisons, you frequently observe a dynamic where inmates pair up. One individual assumes the dominant, traditionally masculine role, while the other is forced into a submissive, feminized role.
So even without women there.
Exactly. It's a stark demonstration of how power dynamics inevitably map themselves onto gendered behaviors. Even when you completely remove women from the environment, the patriarchal hierarchy of dominance and submission just recreates itself.
That power mapping extends beyond enclosed institutions, too. It bleeds into the broader structural violence found in poverty. The research provides a really detailed analysis of the inner city, specifically focusing on the experiences of Puerto Rican women in places like East Harlem.
Right, the cycle of violence.
Yeah, in these neighborhoods, women frequently find themselves caught in this enduring cycle, often growing up with abusive fathers and later suffering under abusive husbands. But I want to make sure I am framing this correctly based on the analysis.
Go ahead.
It's not just random violence, right? It's a collision between cultural expectations and economic reality.
That is the precise structural clash the analysis identifies. In Puerto Rican culture, there's a strong expectation of masculinity that revolves around a man's ability to be the sole provider and support a large family.
But the reality of East Harlem makes that impossible.
Exactly. The crushing reality of systemic poverty, reliance on welfare, and rampant drug addiction in these marginalized environments makes achieving that traditional masculine ideal virtually impossible.
They can't provide.
Right. Men are stripped of their socially mandated role as providers, and the resulting frustration and intense emasculation frequently manifest as physical abuse. The violence is a toxic attempt to reclaim dominance within a patriarchal system that has economically disenfranchised them.
Which brings us to perhaps the ultimate environment of conflict and dominance, actual warfare.
Yeah, this is where it gets very difficult to read.
The historical data regarding the Bosnian War, which took place from 1992 to 1995, is harrowing. It is estimated that over 20,000 Bosnian women were raped, primarily by Serb militias.
And when we apply gender as a category for analysis to those horrific facts, we start to see the systematic machinery operating underneath the brutality.
It wasn't just chaos.
No. In the context of the Bosnian War, rape was not an incidental byproduct of soldiers acting out of control. It was utilized systematically as a calculated weapon of war.
To destroy the community.
To completely disregard and destroy the victim's personhood. The body itself becomes the object of violence. It's an act of total depersonalization. Furthermore, the historical record points out a crucial, often overlooked reality.
What's that?
Muslim men were also frequent victims of rape and sexual assault by other men during this conflict.
Wait, let me make sure I'm understanding this, because that detail completely disrupts the standard narrative we are often fed about the mechanics of war. Are you saying the ultimate target of that violence wasn't just the direct victims, but the psychological dominance over the surviving male population?
Precisely. The analysis connects this directly to the broader theme of male hegemony. Within an atmosphere fueled by genocide, racism, and ethnic superiority, the act of one man sexually violating another is the ultimate tool of emasculation.
It strips away those status.
By raping subordinated men, The aggressors are physically and psychologically stripping them of their masculine status. It reinforces the perpetrator's absolute dominance over an entire population. It sends a message that the targeted group cannot even protect their own bodily autonomy, let alone their families or their territory.
It is incredibly heavy, but absolutely vital to understand how these dynamics operate at the worst extremes. However, to truly grasp the global picture of gender and conflict, we can't just apply a Western perspective to everything.
No, we definitely can't.
When we look at non-Western societies, gender isn't necessarily defined by the same biological or political debates we have in the West. Instead, it is interpreted through complex kinship ties, ancient mythology, and reproductive principles.
It's a completely different framework.
Some cultures even view the physical architecture of the house as a material extension of the body and everyday sociality.
That shift in framework completely changes how you interpret human behavior and interaction.
Just look at how alternative views on sexuality are highlighted in Amazonian cultures.
Oh, the Guarani.
Yes, for the Guarani people, sexual activity isn't centered exclusively on erotic lust or excessive passion, as it often is in Western media. It is a much broader, integrated concept. It encompasses bodily bonding, comfort, cuddling, and mutual grooming. It's fundamentally about harmony.
And then you have the Pieroa.
Right. Conversely, for the Piero of Venezuela, their mythic narratives actually warn that too much promiscuity is dangerous. They believe excessive sexual activity can result in literal physical illness, so their cultural fables focus heavily on honor and physical restraint.
But as we transition to discussing cultural violence in non-Western contexts, we have to maintain our objective analytical lens. The research guides us through some incredibly complex realities regarding bodily autonomy.
Yeah.
In Africa, for instance, various practices of female circumcision have been reported across as many as 25 countries.
I want to highlight a surprising detail from the data there. There is a popular global assumption that female circumcision is an ancient tradition dating back thousands of years.
Right. People just assume it's ancient.
But the evidence actually suggests that for many of these cultures, it's a relatively recent custom that has been adopted and enforced.
It highlights how traditions can be manufactured to control populations. The research also examines male-oriented societies like the Hamar of Ethiopia.
What happens there?
In their culture, wife beating is a formally recognized practice used to demonstrate male hierarchy and discipline within the spousal relationship.
They're formally recognized.
Yes. However, this practice abruptly ceases the moment the woman gives birth.
Wow.
It underscores how deeply tied a woman's social standing and protection from violence are to her reproductive capacity and her status as a mother.
And when we move to South and Central Asia, as well as the Middle East, you see how deeply ingrained concepts of honor and shame dictate extreme fatal violence. In Pakistan, the practice of honor killings, where family members murder a female relative perceived to have brought shame to the family, persists.
It's a devastating reality.
I want to pause there because the source mentions these killers face very few legal repercussions due to Islamic laws of qisas and dayat. Can you unpack what those laws actually mean in this context?
Certainly, qisas and dayat are essentially traditional laws of retribution and compensation. Under these frameworks, the victim's family has the legal right to forgive the perpetrator, sometimes in exchange for financial compensation.
So they can just pardon them.
Yes. And the structural loophole here is that honor killings almost always occur within the family. So a father might murder his daughter, and then his wife or sons will formally forgive him under the law. Because the victim's family issues the pardon, the state drops the charges, and the murderers frequently walk free.
That completely reframes how we look at the legal facilitation of violence. You see similar systemic failures in India, where despite the custom of dowries being officially banned back in 1961, women are still subjected to severe violence and dowry murders when their families cannot meet financial demands.
The law doesn't match the cultural practice.
Exactly. And in Bangladesh, there is a documented rising trend of acid attacks, specifically targeting women who reject a suitor's love or refuse an arranged marriage proposal.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the underlying mechanisms become undeniable. Whether we are looking at the structural, state-sanctioned violence enforced by the military junta in Myanmar or the domestic violence prevalent among the Boobies group in Indonesia, these issues do not exist in a vacuum.
They're all connected.
They are. The research emphasizes that globalization and outlawed economies, specifically the massive international illegal trades in arms and drugs, heavily exacerbate gender violence across transnational borders today. The black market relies on aggressive, hypermasculine enforcement, and women frequently become the invisible, collateral victims of those sprawling shadow economies.
Given all of that structural violence, it is incredibly easy to fall into the trap of viewing women in these conflicts merely as passive victims.
Right, that's what we usually see on the news.
Exactly. It's a very persistent media stereotype to show women only as weeping refugees or collateral damage. But the research completely shatters that narrative. Women are actually central to resistance movements and peace building. Here's where it gets really interesting.
The irony of armed conflict is that the immense disruption it causes actually creates a degree of fluidity in rigid gender roles. War dismantles the status quo.
Because the men are gone.
The men are often away fighting, imprisoned, or killed. Out of sheer necessity for survival, conflict forces women to gain mobility, time, and access to resources and public spaces that they are typically excluded from during peacetime. They have to step up, and that stepping up transforms into organized resistance.
The historical examples of this mobilization are incredible when you dig into them. You have Kalymnian women in Greece who were absolutely instrumental in resisting the Italian occupation during the 1935 Rock War.
They fought back physically.
Yes. When the occupying forces tried to suppress their culture, the women literally took to the streets and fought back with rocks.
And look at Northern Ireland.
Oh, in Northern Ireland, Republican women joined their male compatriots in the 1980 Dirty Protest. For context, this was a severe prison protest where inmates refused to wear prison uniforms or leave their cells, eventually smearing excrement on the walls to demand status as political prisoners. The women in a mob prison endured those same horrific, unsanitary conditions to fight for their political recognition.
They leveraged their own bodies and endurance as political tools. The research also points to El Salvador during the 1980 Civil War, where women didn't just support from the sidelines. They took up arms, fought directly as guerrillas in the jungle, and mobilized massive public demonstrations.
And in Argentina, you have the famous Mothers of the Plaza de Mayo.
Such a powerful movement.
When the military dictatorship began secretly kidnapping and murdering political dissidents, these mothers relentlessly marched in the public square, demanding governmental recognition for their disappeared children. They used their untouchable status as grieving mothers to defy a lethal regime.
And that fierce agency translates directly into conflict mediation and peace building. To understand how they actually achieve this, we need to break down how diplomacy works in practice.
Track 1 versus Track 2.
Exactly. In international relations, diplomacy is generally divided into Track 1 and Track 2. Track 2 involves what is known as citizen diplomacy. This is the unofficial, grassroots work usually run by local NGOs, community leaders, and activists. They operate back-channel activities to build trust and actual community support for peace.
And Track 1?
Track 1 is the official, formal peace talks at the highest governmental levels where the actual treaties are signed. Historically, Track 1 has been overwhelmingly male-dominated. The men fight the war, and the men negotiate the peace.
But the historical data gives us the ultimate success story of women bridging that gap and forcing their way to the table. It details the Northern Ireland Women's Coalition, or NIWC.
A truly groundbreaking group.
This was a cross-community group of NGO workers and activists who looked at the segregated political landscape and literally transcended massive religious, class, and ideological divisions. Catholic and Protestant women came together, formed their own official political party, ran for election, and actually won 2 seats at the official Track 1 negotiating table.
They didn't just ask to be included, they won the seats.
Exactly. And by securing that access, they successfully embedded their core principles of human rights, equality, and community inclusion directly into the landmark 1997 Good Friday Agreement. They didn't just ask for peace, they structurally changed the architecture of the treaty.
It's a profound example of institutional transformation. But this peacemaking agency isn't exclusive to Western political frameworks. Grassroots mediation takes incredibly innovative forms globally.
The research highlights brilliant non-Western examples. Take the Ifugao of the Philippines, a former headhunting group. The women in the society actively use ritual songs during community gatherings to reformulate male aggression.
Through singing.
Yeah, they sing narratives that redirect the desire for violent vengeance into nonviolent tales of heroism and social harmony. They culturally engineer peace through art.
That's amazing.
Or consider the civil war in Mozambique in the 1980s. The women there pioneered deeply psychological strategies for repairing community ties after horrific violence. If a woman was killed before bearing children, the family responsible for the killing would actually give a child to the mourning family.
Which sounds unfathomable from a Western perspective.
Very much so.
But in their cultural context, it was a profound form of compensation and communal healing. It wasn't just a transaction, it was a way of weaving the fractured community back together through literal, forced kinship. The violence was answered with the creation of new family bonds.
These grassroots movements, both Western and non-Western, represent an immense global push for peace.
And the research points out that this power was finally recognized on an international institutional level in October 2000.
UN Resolution 1325.
Yes, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. It was a landmark mandate explicitly calling on all states to ensure women's full, equal participation in all peace processes and negotiations going forward.
So what does this all mean? When you take a step back and look at all of this together, from the sworn virgins of Albania protecting their family land, to the strategic use of violence in Bosnia, to the peace tables of Northern Ireland, the main takeaway, speaking directly to you, the listener, is this. Gender is absolutely not just a demographic box to check on a census form.
No, it's far more profound than that.
It is a deeply ingrained, incredibly powerful sociocultural framework. It dictates the rules of war, it determines the vulnerability of entire populations, and it is the very architecture that lasting peace is built upon.
This raises an important question, and it is a thought I want to leave you with as we conclude today's analysis. The historical record reveals a profound paradox. The sheer chaos of conflict actually causes rigid gender roles to become fluid. That devastation inadvertently gives marginalized women new agency, mobility, and critical roles in society and resistance. So when the guns finally go quiet, the treaties are signed, and the conflict ends, how do we ensure that those hard-won equalities and that newly found agency aren't immediately erased by a society desperately trying to return to normal in peacetime?
That is a brilliant and challenging thought to end on. It fundamentally changes how you look at the aftermath of any historical event and who actually gets to define what normal is. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation on this deep dive. We hope it gave you a completely new lens to view the world through. Until next time, keep questioning the rules and keep diving deep.